The plane hadn't even left the ground yet when it happened. I told you all he doesn't belong here. Get him out. Her voice wasn't just loud. It was cruel, sharp, filled with disgust. The kind of tone people use when they talk about trash on the floor. But Belle Covington wasn't talking about trash. She was pointing directly at a child, a black child, sitting quietly in seat 1A, first class. Every conversation in the cabin stopped. Heads turned. Confused whispers rippled through the air like cracks in glass. A woman was standing up, yelling about a little boy. Not yelling because he did something wrong. Not because he hurt anyone. She was yelling because he existed. He wasn't crying. He wasn't talking back. He wasn't even moving. He just sat there, silent, eyes wide, tiny hands gripping the edge of his workbook. Pages full of numbers far too advanced for his age. He looked around at the grown-ups staring at him, and his lips trembled as he whispered, "I didn't do anything, please." But no one defended him. Not yet, because the storm was just beginning. To understand how an 8-year-old genius ended up in handcuffs, on a plane he had every right to be on, you need to go back just a few hours earlier, before the shouting, before the lies, before the entire cabin decided that this innocent little boy didn't belong. That morning in Los Angeles, Michael Ashworth boarded Flight 447 to Boston with nothing but a backpack and his math workbook. No parents beside him, just a chaperone escorting him to the gate. His ticket, first class. His seat, 1A, the very front row. The kind of seat you only get if someone really important is behind it. And Michael was. What the other passengers didn't know, and what the angry white woman screaming in first class would deeply regret, was that Michael wasn't just another kid. He was a child genius, an actual mathematical prodigy. At 8 years old, he had just become the youngest person ever accepted into the Mathematics Hall of Fame. Professors from Ivy League universities had already called him one of the brightest minds of his generation. He was flying alone to Boston, where he would be honored in front of the world. And the man funding that ceremony? His father, Donovan Ashworth, billionaire CEO of Ashworth Technologies, one of the most powerful tech empires in America. But Michael never flaunted his father's name. He wasn't raised to. Instead, he quietly boarded the plane, took his assigned seat, opened his math workbook, and began solving calculus problems. While other kids played games or watched cartoons, Michael loved math. He didn't care about luxury. He didn't care about status. He just loved numbers. But to Belle Covington, his face was a problem. Belle was already angry when she boarded the plane. Angry at her job, her demotion, her failing career. She worked in middle management at Ashworth Technologies of all places, but didn't know who Michael was. Didn't recognize the name on his boarding pass. All she saw was a black child in a first-class seat, alone, calm, confident, and that was enough for her rage to take root. She walked past the seat with a scowl, rolling her eyes in disbelief. She couldn't accept it. In her mind, first class had rules, unwritten rules, and children like him, they didn't belong. She stewed in silence for an hour, pretending to read emails on her phone, watching Michael, watching the flight attendant check his ticket and smile politely, watching him calmly do math like a little professor. Every quiet moment made her more furious. And then she snapped. Right before takeoff, Belle stood up, pointed at Michael, and yelled, "That child is in the wrong seat. I demand you move him. This is a security issue. He doesn't belong here." The air was ripped apart by her voice. Passengers turned. Phones came out. A few started recording. Michael looked up, startled, shrinking back into his seat like he had done something wrong. But he hadn't. He hadn't even spoken to her. He hadn't looked at her. "Show me your ticket." Belle barked. "What are you doing up here? Who put you in first class?" Michael's little hand reached for his backpack. He held out the boarding pass. "This is seat 1A, he said softly. "That's what it says." But she didn't care. "It's fake. There's no way your family could afford this. Who bought that for you, huh? Where are your parents? Are they even allowed to let you fly alone?" The words hit him like punches, each sentence louder than the last, each word sharper than the one before. That's when the murmurs began. Passengers nearby started whispering. Some agreed. "It is strange," one man said. "A kid alone in first class?" Others shrugged, unsure what to believe. But the seed was planted. Doubt was growing, and Michael could feel it. He pressed the workbook to his chest like it could protect him. Tears threatened to spill, but he held them back. He didn't want to cry. Not in front of these people. Not when they were all watching him like he was guilty of something. A few seats back, someone muttered, "This is getting out of control." But Belle wasn't finished. "I'm calling the police," she shouted, her face red with fury. "I'm not flying with a child thief next to me. Who knows what he's planning?" And with that, she pulled out her phone. She actually called. A grown adult, calling the police, on a boy who hadn't done a single thing wrong. And as Michael sat there, surrounded by silence, by eyes full of judgment, by passengers whispering and flight attendants hesitating, he whispered the same sentence again. "I didn't do anything. Please." But no one listened. Not yet, because in 5 minutes, everything would change. In 5 minutes, the real story would begin. In 5 minutes, she'd regret it more than anything in her life. The words still echoed through the cabin. "I'm calling the police." And she did. Right there in the middle of the first-class aisle, Belle Covington dialed the emergency number with trembling fingers. Not from fear, but from rage. Passengers watched in stunned silence. Some were too shocked to move. Others leaned in, curious, their phones recording, their minds unsure whether to believe her or not. She barked into the phone like she was reporting a terrorist, not a child. "There's a suspicious unaccompanied minor in seat 1A, she said. "He might have a stolen ticket. This isn't safe. You need to send officers as soon as we land." And with that, it was done. A false report. A dangerous accusation. A seed of hatred, now fully grown. Michael didn't move. He just sat there, small and still. His tiny fingers gripped the edges of his seatbelt. The workbook lay forgotten in his lap. For the first time, math couldn't save him. One flight attendant, Temperance Rodriguez, approached with calm eyes and a steady voice. She had checked his boarding pass earlier. She knew it was real. "Ma'am," she said to Belle, "his seat is valid. I verified it myself." Belle turned to her with a glare sharp enough to slice steel. "Are you blind?" she hissed. "That kid is not supposed to be here. I'm a businesswoman. I paid for this seat. People like him don't fly first class. You're being tricked." The insult didn't just hang in the air, it poisoned it. People like him. That's when the air marshal stirred. Seat 3C. A quiet, calm man named Marcus Stone. To most, he looked like just another traveler in a suit. But under that calm exterior was a trained federal agent. He had been watching everything since boarding. And while he hadn't yet moved, he had already started recording. Because something didn't feel right, and it was about to get worse. 10 minutes passed. Michael sat frozen. Belle paced like a hunter circling prey. Her face was twisted with false concern. "I just feel so bad for him," she said loudly to the couple beside her. "Poor boy. No parents. Who knows what kind of life he's had. No supervision. They end up stealing just to survive. You know how it goes." The older man next to her nodded slowly, unsure. "You may be right," he muttered. "Kids today, it's hard to tell." Even doubt began to flicker in the flight attendant's eyes. She returned to Michael's side. "Sweetheart, would you mind checking your backpack? Just to show everyone there's nothing there." Michael looked up with trembling lips. "I didn't take anything. I swear." "I know, baby," she said gently, "but it would help us calm everyone down." With shaking hands, the child reached for his bag. He unzipped it, heart pounding his chest like a drum. Then, a phone fell out. Not his. Not one he had ever seen before. It hit the cabin floor with a soft thud. The silence was loud. "There it is." Belle screamed. "That's my phone. I told you. He stole it." Gasps echoed through the rows. Phones tilted to record. Whispers turned into shouts. "I knew it," someone said. "Thief. Unbelievable. Call the police again." And Michael? His whole world shattered in that moment. "I didn't touch it," he said, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I don't know how it got in my bag." But no one listened. Not yet. The doubt that Bell had planted had taken root. And now, even the people who had said nothing before began to speak. Against him. "Check his ID," someone demanded. "Call his parents. There's no way this boy belongs here." He clutched his chest. He couldn't breathe. His workbook slipped off his lap and onto the floor. The pages fluttered, revealing the complicated math equations he had solved just minutes ago. But nobody cared. They didn't see a prodigy. They didn't see an honor student. They saw a little black boy with a phone that wasn't his. "Call the cops again," Bell insisted. "Smug now. Let's land this plane before he causes any more trouble." And that's when the captain's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a passenger issue, we'll be making an emergency landing in Denver. Please remain seated." The passengers erupted. Good. Finally, he should be arrested. Michael leaned back, eyes full of fear, tears sliding silently down his cheeks. He whispered again, voice cracking, "I didn't do anything wrong." Still, no one helped him. Outside, police cars were already waiting on the tarmac, lights flashing, officers prepared. The first-class cabin buzzed with excitement. Belle stood tall, proud, confident, her expression smug, like she had just saved the world. And Michael? He looked out the window, at the flashing red and blue, at the officers waiting to take him away. He was 8 years old. He had never even been late for school. And now, he was about to be arrested. What no one knew, not Belle, not the passengers, not even the officers, was that a secret was about to explode. And that phone, the one that fell from his backpack, it had never been his. Someone had planted it, and someone had seen everything. In 5 minutes, the story would turn upside down. In 5 minutes, the woman pointing fingers would beg for forgiveness. In 5 minutes, Karma would walk onto that plane wearing a tailored suit and a name that made people tremble. But for now, the child sat alone, and the world believed the lie. The wheels touched down on the Denver runway with a jolt that felt heavier than normal. It wasn't just a plane descending. It was a weight of injustice falling hard on an 8-year-old boy who had done absolutely nothing wrong. From his seat near the window, Michael Ashworth saw the flashing lights, red and blue, blinking like warnings. Police cars, airport security, emergency vehicles, all of them waiting outside like a dangerous criminal was on board. And somehow, they were waiting for him. He couldn't stop shaking. His little hands were wet with sweat. His cheeks were still wet from tears. And in his lap lay the one thing that brought him comfort. His workbook, pages filled with math problems he had solved just that morning. Numbers had always been honest with him. People? Not so much. As the flight rolled to a stop, you could feel the cabin buzz with energy. Passengers leaned forward, phones in hand, eyes wide, hungry for drama. They whispered each other like they were part of a breaking news story. "That's him," one man said. "The little thief." "Can you believe he thought he'd get away with it?" another whispered. Belle Covington sat tall, arms crossed like a judge ready to pass sentence. She glanced around the cabin with pride, as if she had just saved them all from some great danger. She had accused a child, planted a phone, and called the police, and somehow she felt heroic. Then came the sound that turned everything silent. Heavy footsteps. Boots. 2 officers entered the cabin, Detective Rivera and Officer Thompson. Faces blank, eyes alert. These weren't airport staff. They were real law enforcement, and they weren't here to ask questions. They were here to arrest someone. The air became thick. Every breath felt like a struggle. Michael couldn't move. He wanted to disappear. He wanted to run. But he just sat there, still and small, heart pounding so loud it hurt his ears. The officers scanned the rows. Their eyes landed on him. Belle stood up and pointed. "That's him," she said. "He's the one. I caught him red-handed." The phone dropped right out his bag. Everyone saw it. Nods followed. Murmurs of agreement. Passengers pointed their cameras. No one asked what really happened. No one asked Michael if it was true. Officer Thompson approached slowly. "Son," he said, "we're going to need you to come with us." Michael looked up with eyes full of fear. "I didn't steal anything," he said. "Please, I don't even know that phone." "We'll figure that out later," the officer said, his voice firm. "Right now, you're being detained for theft." That word, detained, hit like a hammer, and then the unthinkable happened. The officer reached into his belt and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Michael flinched, his breath caught in his throat. "Please," he cried, "please don't do that. I didn't do anything." "You have the right to remain silent," the officer began. "Anything you say can and will be used against you." And with those words, the cuffs clicked shut around his tiny wrists. Gasps filled the cabin, but not of protest, of satisfaction, of people who believed they were watching justice. Phones flashed. "Unbelievable," one woman said. "He looks so young." "Well, kids start stealing early these days," someone else added. Michael sobbed, hard, loud, the kind of cry that only comes from deep fear and confusion. "I want my daddy," he sobbed. "Please call my dad. I don't want to go with them. I didn't take anything." But they kept walking, escorting him down the aisle like a criminal. No one reached out. No one stopped them, not even the flight attendants. Every one of you who recorded his arrest, who whispered and nodded along, who judged a child based on his skin, he paused, his voice calm but chilling. You watched a crime and did nothing. And that's exactly what you'll be remembered for. The passengers dropped their eyes. The guilt soaked in like cold rain. Then Donovan walked out. The door shut behind him, and silence fell again. Not pride, not righteousness, not satisfaction. Only the slow, creeping realization they had all helped destroy an innocent child's moment. And now they would all be part of the story. Michael sat alone in the airport holding room, knees pulled to his chest, tiny wrists still sore from handcuffs. He was too exhausted to cry anymore. His workbook sat unopened beside him. The numbers he once loved now looked like strangers. He kept whispering the same thing to himself. "I didn't do anything. I just want to go to Boston." He didn't know if anyone believed him. He didn't know that at that very moment, his father was storming to the airport surrounded by attorneys, investigators, and federal security. And he didn't know, he wouldn't believe, that the entire truth had just been proven on video. Until the door opened. Officer Thompson walked in, eyes heavy with guilt. Behind him stood Donovan Ashworth, face tight, controlled, but eyes soft the moment he saw his son. Michael looked up. His lip trembled. "Daddy." Donovan crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside him. He didn't care about the officers watching. He didn't care that his $1,000 suit was getting wrinkled on the floor. He wrapped his arms around his son. "I'm here now," he whispered. "I've got you." And Michael finally let go. He buried his face in his father's chest and sobbed, not just from fear, but from relief, from the pain of being believed again. "I didn't take her phone," he cried. "She lied, Daddy. I didn't do anything." Donovan didn't need to ask. He already knew. "I know you didn't, son," he said softly. "You never had to prove anything to me. But now the world knows it too." Officer Thompson stepped forward, shame heavy in his voice. "Mr. Ashworth, we are sincerely sorry. We were misled. Your son is being released immediately. No charges. No record." Donovan stood up slowly, keeping one hand protectively on Michael's shoulder. "You didn't just arrest a child," he said. "You humiliated a prodigy. You crushed a boy's dignity based on nothing but lies and skin color. You'll answer for this personally and professionally." The officer swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." Donovan didn't shout. He didn't need to. His words were enough to chill the room. Back at the plane, Belle Covington thought she had gotten away with it, until the doors opened again. This time, officers walked in for her. Real handcuffs, real charges, real consequences. "Ms. Covington," the detective said coldly, "you are under arrest for filing a false police report, fraud, child endangerment, and obstruction of justice." Belle's mouth dropped. "What? No, wait. I didn't. This is a misunderstanding." "Actually," the detective said, holding up a tablet, "this is your misunderstanding. We have federal video evidence of you planting the phone in the child's bag. You're being taken into custody. The shift in the cabin was instant. The same passengers who had nodded along now stared in shock. The proud woman who had shouted for police, now crying and begging not to be taken away. She twisted in her seat. Please, I didn't know he was the CEO's son. I swear I didn't mean. But it was too late. Her words no longer mattered. The lie had already exploded. And now the world would see the truth. Because Agent Marcus Stone, who had seen everything, had already submitted the footage to federal records. And Donovan's media team, they weren't waiting. Within minutes, statements were being released. Newsrooms were alerted. Social media teams prepared carefully worded facts. Donovan Ashworth didn't scream online. He let the truth do the damage. Outside the aircraft, as Michael sat quietly in his father's car, breathing slowly for the first time in hours, his face appeared on hundreds of screens. Every network began covering the story. Child genius wrongfully accused by corporate executive on Flight 447. False theft claim sparks arrest of black 8-year-old. Turns out he's a CEO's son. Federal Air Marshal releases footage of racist framing by passenger. The footage was clean, crystal clear. It showed Belle's accidental stumble, her hand slipping the phone into the bag, her pretend panic, her pointing, her lies, and then the arrest, the handcuffs on a crying child. The video was shared on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. In under 3 hours, it hit 10 million views. By the end of the night, 38 million. Hashtag Justice for Michael was trending worldwide. But none of that mattered to Michael just yet. He sat beside his father in the SUV, still in silence. Do you want to go home? Donovan asked gently. Michael shook his head. I want to go to Boston. Donovan smiled softly. Then we go to Boston. And with that, the car turned toward the runway. A private jet was waiting, fueled, ready, and clear for takeoff. Michael wouldn't fly commercial again. Not because he was afraid, but because his father would never take the chance again. His boy would never feel helpless like that again. And Belle? She spent the night in a holding cell. No phone, no lawyer, no support, and soon no career. Because Donovan had already issued the internal directive. Belle Covington is permanently terminated. No severance, no references, lifetime blacklisting from every company we influence. And they influence many. Her name was now connected to racism, fraud, and public humiliation. But that was only the beginning, because lawsuits were coming. From Donovan, from civil rights attorneys, from Michael's legal team, and perhaps worst of all, from the world watching. Because what Belle had done wasn't just evil. It was viral, and now her face was everywhere. Not as a businesswoman, but as a warning. By morning, the world had seen the video. Not just a few hundred people. Not just America. The entire world. From New York to Nairobi, Tokyo to Toronto. Everyone had watched a little boy sit quietly on a plane, only to be dragged away in handcuffs because of one woman's lies. They saw the stumble, the planted phone, the fake accusations. They saw the officers ignore his cries. They saw the passengers nod and agree. They saw him whisper, over and over again, I didn't do anything. Please call my daddy. And they saw what happened next. The arrival of his father, the billionaire who brought an army, the truth, the humiliation. The moment Belle Covington realized she had just tried to destroy the son of her own CEO. Hashtag Justice for Michael had gone from a hashtag to a movement. Talk show hosts replayed the video on live television. Podcasters and YouTubers made hour-long deep dives. Civil rights leaders called it one of the clearest acts of racial profiling caught on tape in modern history. But it wasn't just news. It was heartbreak. Parents wept watching the video. Teachers shared it with their classes to talk about bias. Activists organized marches holding signs that read, Math doesn't lie. Racism does. He was 8 and brilliant and still arrested. And through it all, Michael said nothing. He didn't need to. The world was speaking for him now. Belle, on the other hand, couldn't run from what she had done. Her name was on every news site. Her LinkedIn was shut down in hours. Her photo was being shared with captions like, "This is the woman who framed a genius. Corporate Karen of the Year." People weren't just angry. They were furious. And what made it worse for Belle was that she had lied on camera. Not just to the flight attendants. Not just to the police. But to millions of people watching now. She had smiled while ruining a child's life. And the internet doesn't forget that. Her emails were flooded with rage. Her former colleagues stopped answering her calls. Even her own family stopped defending her. And when she finally spoke to a reporter, her voice cracked. "I didn't know who he was," she said. "I made a mistake. I was just confused." But the world had already answered. You didn't need to know who he was. You just needed to know he was human. Meanwhile, Donovan Ashworth was doing more than defending his son. He was transforming his company. Within 24 hours, he launched a zero-tolerance policy on internal discrimination. Every employee, from interns to executives, would be required to complete extensive training on racial bias, justice, and public accountability. But he wasn't done. 2 days after the incident, he called a press conference. Every major network tuned in. Donovan stood behind the podium, calm and sharp. Michael stood beside him, holding his father's hand. And when he spoke, the world listened. "My son," he said slowly, "is a mathematical genius. At 8 years old, he has solved problems that stump PhDs. He was flying to Boston to be honored, not for who I am, but for who he is." He paused. The crowd was silent. But none of that protected him. Not his talent. Not his ticket. Not his silence. Because his skin spoke louder than his math. Gasps in the room. A few reporters blinked away tears. "I'm not here to punish one person," Donovan continued. "She will face justice. But this is bigger. This is about how quickly people believe the worst in black children. This is about how a lie can grow in silence. And how we as adults must do better." He then announced something that shocked everyone. A $100 million scholarship fund, named after Michael, for gifted minority children who face injustice or barriers in education. It would cover tuition, mentorship, housing, and most importantly, protection. And Michael? He finally spoke. Not to yell, not to blame, but to teach. Standing in front of cameras, voice soft but clear, he said, "I forgive the people who hurt me, but I hope they learn something. Because being wrong is one thing. Staying wrong is worse." That line? Being wrong is one thing. Staying wrong is worse. It was printed on T-shirts within hours. It was quoted on the news. It became the message of the movement. Michael wasn't just a math genius anymore. He was a symbol. A quiet child who had survived cruelty and chosen dignity. At her arraignment, Belle sat in court wearing a prison jumpsuit. The judge read the charges. False reporting, fraud, child endangerment, tampering with evidence, federal interference with aviation. The room was packed with reporters. And when her lawyer tried to argue stress, the judge shook her head. "This wasn't stress," she said. "This was racism." But while Belle's life crumbled, Michael's was just beginning. He went on to Boston. He stood on stage at the Mathematics Hall of Fame. He gave his speech. And when the crowd stood for him, cheering, clapping, crying, he simply smiled. Not because he needed revenge, but because he had survived. And in doing so, he had changed the world. Michael didn't ask to become a symbol. He never wanted the world's attention. He just wanted to go to Boston, solve math problems, and feel proud. But sometimes, life gives a microphone to the quietest voice. And when it did, Michael spoke truth the whole world heard. It started with schools. Teachers across the country began playing his video in class, not just to show injustice, but to show strength. Kids watched how he didn't scream, didn't fight, didn't lie. He simply told the truth, even when no one listened. In a classroom in Ohio, a 5th grade boy raised his hand after the video ended and said, "He's stronger than a superhero. He didn't punch anyone and he still won." That clip went viral too. Next came companies. Dozens of CEOs reached out to Donovan Ashworth asking for help. Not business help, bias training, policy reform, protection for their youngest customers. Airlines, especially, rewrote their internal rules. From now on, false reports involving minors will require verified evidence before action, and all employees, gate agents, flight attendants, even pilots, will receive new education on racial profiling and unconscious bias. One airline published a public apology to Michael directly. Another invited him to speak to their leadership team. Donovan declined most of the offers. He wasn't interested in public relations. He wanted real change. The U.S. Senate took notice. Within a week, a bipartisan group of lawmakers introduced the Michael Ashworth Passenger Protection Act, a bill to prevent minors from being detained without review from a child welfare advocate when traveling alone. Even lawmakers who never agreed on anything stood together on this one, because the footage wasn't political. It was human, and it had broken hearts in every city, every race, every party. Meanwhile, Belle's world collapsed by the hour. Her face became a meme. Her name, a warning. She was dropped by every professional group she'd ever joined. Her email was leaked, but no one emailed her to support her. Only anger. Every attempt at an apology failed. Her words rang hollow. "I'm not racist," she tried to say in an online statement. But the internet answered. Then why did you assume a child was dangerous just for sitting near you? And the final blow came when a childhood friend appeared on a podcast. She said Belle had always been like this, judgmental, afraid of anything that didn't fit her small worldview. She didn't just make a mistake, the friend said. She revealed who she's always been. That clip? 14 million views in 2 days. But while Belle's name sank, Michael's kept rising. A museum invited him to visit their mathematics exhibit and help design a new one for kids who look like him. An author offered to write his story. A children's nonprofit asked him to be their honorary ambassador. And Michael, for the first time since that day on the plane, started to smile again, not because he was famous, not because the cameras were gone, but because people were listening now. One moment stood out. A school in Chicago invited him to visit. The principal had shown the flight video to the whole school during assembly. Then they watched Michael's Boston speech. When Michael walked into that school's auditorium, hundreds of students stood, cheering, not because he was perfect, but because he was strong. And afterward, a little boy with skin like his and glasses too big for his face came up and hugged him. "I want to be smart like you," the boy said, "but I was scared. Now I'm not anymore." That's when it hit Michael. He hadn't just survived something terrible. He had given other kids hope. At home, things were different too. He and his father talked more, not just about numbers, but about feelings, safety, identity. Donovan made changes too, not as a CEO, but as a dad. He reduced his travel, brought in tutors and therapists, built Michael a home library filled with books by Black scientists, writers, and thinkers. He wanted his son to grow up knowing that brilliance and blackness belonged in the same sentence. Always. And through it all, Michael kept working on his math. But something was new. He started writing in the margins of his pages. Words, not just equations. Short messages. Thoughts. On one page, he scribbled, "Just because you're quiet doesn't mean you're weak." On another, "I want to build something that helps kids feel safe." Donovan saw the notes. He smiled. Michael wasn't just solving problems on paper anymore. He was solving them in the world. Meanwhile, Belle faced trial. Real trial. With real evidence. Federal evidence. Agent Marcus Stone's video had been shown to the court. The judge didn't even let her lawyer finish. The verdict came quickly. Guilty on all charges. Sentencing was scheduled for the following month. And though many called for harsh punishment, Michael had already said what he wanted. "I just hope she learns," he told a reporter. "I don't want to hate her. I just want her to stop hurting people like me." That sentence hit the world harder than any punishment, because it reminded everyone what had been lost and what had been found. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back wall. Camera crews waited outside the building. The world had followed this story from the very beginning, and now they were here for the ending. Belle Covington stood silently beside her lawyer. Her face was pale. Her hands, once busy pointing fingers, now trembled. She wore the same expression she had on that plane the moment she saw Donovan Ashworth walk in. Fear, shame, and disbelief. The judge entered. "Miss Coington," she said, her voice steady, "you have been found guilty of multiple charges, including falsify a report, child endangerment, obstruction of justice, and tamper with evidence on a commercial aircraft." Belle didn't speak. She knew there was nothing she could say that could fix what she had done. The judge continued. "Your actions endangered a child's life, violated federal law, and revealed the very worst of racial prejudice. You didn't just make a mistake. You manipulated the truth and turned a cabin full of people into accomplices." Belle looked at the floor. And even when the truth came out, the judge said, "You offered excuses, not remorse." The sentence was clear: 3 years in federal prison. No parole. Gasped from the gallery. A few reporters scribbled the number quickly into their notepads. And just like that, Belle's world was over. But the judge wasn't finished. She turned her attention to the side of the room where Donovan Ashworth and Michael were seated. And to young Michael Ashworth, she said gently, "I want to say this. I'm sorry the justice system failed you in those first few moments. But I hope today helps show that the truth always finds its voice. You are brave, and you are brilliant." Michael gave a small, polite nod. He was still only 8. But in that courtroom, he carried himself like someone twice his age. As the reporters poured out of the courtroom to broadcast the news, Donovan stood beside his son and gently took his hand. "You okay?" he asked. Michael nodded. "Can we go now?" "Where to?" Donovan asked. Michael smiled. "Home. I want to finish that equation I was working on." Donovan laughed softly. "Of course you do." The world outside wasn't done celebrating him, though. Just 2 weeks later, Michael received the National Medal of Academic Honor, the youngest child in history to do so. At the ceremony, he stood in front of government leaders, scientists, and community members. He didn't talk about his trauma. He talked about what came next. "I want to build a school," he said. "One where kids who look like me don't have to prove they belong. One where no one is judged for sitting in the front row." The audience gave him a standing ovation. And that wasn't the only award. A leading university named a math scholarship after him. The city of Boston gave him the key to the city. Even a major airline created a new training program called the Michael Protocol to prevent what happened on Flight 447 from ever happening again. Belle, meanwhile, faded into silence. No interviews, no statements, just time and reflection. Some people online said the sentence wasn't long enough. Others said it was too harsh. But Michael's words remained the most powerful. "I don't want her to suffer. I just want her to understand." That sentence stayed with people. It appeared in classrooms, posters, even tattooed on someone's arm. Because forgiveness from a child, after what he went through, wasn't weakness. It was power. 1 year later, a journalist asked Donovan during a tech event, "What was the moment you were most proud as a father?" He didn't hesitate. When Michael said, "I forgive her," Donovan smiled. "I've made billions of dollars. But nothing in my life has ever meant more than seeing my son choose dignity over revenge." Michael didn't speak about the incident much anymore. He didn't need to. His actions spoke for him. He kept studying, kept building, and started sketching blueprints for that school he talked about. He called it Front Row Academy. And at the entrance, a plaque that read, "Brilliance belongs everywhere, even in seat 1A. As for the world, it changed. Not overnight, not perfectly, but every now and then, a teacher paused to give a child extra attention. A flight attendant looked twice before judging a passenger. A security officer asked one more question before reaching for handcuffs. And all because of one boy, a boy who loved numbers. A boy who just wanted to get to Boston. A boy who taught the world that the smallest voices often speak the loudest truths. So if you've ever been doubted, if you've ever been judged before being heard, if you've ever been told you don't belong in the front row, remember Michael Ashworth and sit there anyway.